Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Big one coming up Saturday, high noon, inside Lane Stadium. Georgia Tech is in town, and we're here to talk about it. It's episode 384 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. We're coming at you on a Thursday, October 24th, 2024, from our high-tech studio here in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month, and again, if you're a Virginia Tech student, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, including free checking. Visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, as always, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way, senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. In the fourth chair, our founder and general manager, Mr. Will Stewart. And the mustache man producing this show behind the scenes, Mr. Nick Brown. Well, guys, it's crazy that we look forward to college football season. We talk about it for so long. And here we are, the last game of October. I mean, it feels like it's flown by like that.
It does go quick. You always get so excited for football, and then it's like, man, there's only a month of football left after this. It's a little bit disappointing and depressing when you think about it like that, but just enjoy the ride along the way.
Yeah, the problem with football is it takes up 1/3 of the year, and the rest is 2/3 of the year talking about the next football season and talking about transfer portal stuff and NIL. So the season is still really enjoyable, but the offseason maybe not so much anymore.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, well, it's kind of fun times for Virginia Tech football right now because depending on how you want to look at it, we're essentially in playoff mode here because every game that Tech plays from here on out is essentially an ACC title game, elimination game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely accurate. I mean, if Virginia Tech loses to Georgia Tech, they'll have 2 losses, and it would probably take a miracle for them to make the ACC title game. But if they win, they keep themselves alive for one more week.
Ain't no Coastal Division anymore. I mean, you could bank on that. You have 3 losses in the Coastal. We're still in this thing right there to the end. Now with the single division format they have in the ACC, you've got to have 0 or 1 losses, maximum of what you can do to be in the hunt, and 2 is an eliminator. So there's no wiggling here the rest of the way. They have to win out if they want to make the title game probably, and I don't know. We'll see if they have it in them the way they've played lately. In the first half of BC, I think they could if they played like that. If they played in the third quarter like that, no chance. So, which team is going to show up this week?
We'll dive a little bit deeper into that conversation at the end of the show. Take a look at the landscape of the ACC. But first, I want to take things to the press conference yesterday for you, Andy. First and foremost, any injury updates to know?
Not a ton. Takai Heath was not out there. Laith Gannon was back at practice. Given how the offensive line's played lately, I don't think that's going to mean much because I think they have sort of a top 7 right now that are the guys that they're rolling with and perform pretty well with. Nick Gallo's still off to the side. Tucker Holloway's still off to the side. Still no Jalen Stroman. Doesn't sound like he's going to be back this year, so nothing really new. I guess Ollie Jennings is the one working his way back, and when's he going to be his productive self again? Probably looks more and more like himself every week, but we'll see if that shows up on Saturday and he gets the kind of targets and receptions that he normally has.
There was a question asked at the press conference yesterday that was thought-provoking. I thought it was a good question where they asked Coach Pry about some of the freshmen. And with now getting towards the end of the season and the 4-game rule, could we see some of them start to play a role to gain a little bit of experience under their belts? What did Coach have to say about that?
He said there are a couple guys that are sort of on the cusp here. And I think, Keelan Adams, Chance Wiggins, Josh Clark at cornerback, Gabe Williams at linebacker. Those are all guys that I think could be in the mix. And I think if you look at a couple of them like Wiggins and Gabe Williams, these are, big guys who can run. And that's like exactly what you want on special teams for coverage units and things like that. So I think if you're going to start to work them into the lineup, that's the way to do it. Keelan Adams, maybe and some actual reps at receiver. You look at the lineup right now, he's one of 7 guys that they had working on the main field yesterday. Heath was out. Xavier Turner Bradshaw was actually doing scout team stuff. So, maybe that's a signal that Keelan Adams is moving up the ranks right now. He was running with the 2s during warm-ups last week. Didn't get on the field in that capacity, but I think he's close to a guy who can make an impact. So this is the time of year where that starts to happen. You can play in 4 games. I've looked at this and somebody was asking about it. I'm like, the ACC title game would not count if they play in that. The playoffs would not count. So you can have 4 regular season games, a conference championship game, and then 4 more games potentially in the playoffs. You could have a freshman play 9 games and retain his red shirt this year. Like, that's not going to happen, but I mean, that potential is there, which is just kind of a funny way to think about it.
Yeah, that is kind of bonkers to think about. Anything else from Coach Pryor, maybe even the players that stood out yesterday?
We talked to, Keyshawn Burgos. I thought he was, we talked to both coaches about him. And they say he's just one of the highest motor players on the team. Just, constantly moving, trailing plays, and really the fumble recovery he had last week came as a result of trailing the play. He was just in the right spot, and I think that's sort of been indicative of this defense, especially all these red zone turnovers that they're forcing. They're not giving up on a play, not giving up on a drive, and good things happen when you're around the ball. And he's been around the ball a lot and came up with that fumble recovery.
Yeah, it's crazy. 6 red zone turnovers forced in the last 4 games, kind of a bonkers number for Virginia Tech. And we sat here and said, oh, there's no way they can keep it up. And then they did it again last week against Boston College.
And we'll keep saying it until they don't. Right? Because it is true. When it comes down to it, I prefer the good old-fashioned way of just like not letting them get in the red zone at all.
Stop them before they get to the red zone.
Having them punt the football, and maybe you get better field position out of that. That seems a little more... That's a easier path to success, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech, noon kick inside Lane Stadium. It's going to be a fun one. Virginia Tech comes in 10.5-point favorites as it currently sits right now, and this has been such an interesting series. Nick made a nice graphic earlier this week, called it the Techmo Bowl, which is fun, and he had some cool elements to that graphic. Hokies lead the all-time series, 11 wins, 8 losses. Bill Roth put out an interesting tweet, and you had also linked it in your article here, Chris. The road team has won 8 of the last 9 games in the series. The only home team to win was Georgia Tech in 2017. Last Hokies win in Lane Stadium over Georgia Tech was in 2012. The Jackets have won their last 4 games played here in Blacksburg. So
that was
just kind of crazy.
That was the Cody Jernell walk-off kick, right?
Right, yeah.
In overtime?
Yeah, and I'm not convinced Georgia Tech would have won that game in 2017 if Virginia Tech didn't have all those travel issues coming back from Miami the previous week.
Possibly. And then
Jackson being hurt.
They had a shot down the stretch. I think they threw a couple deep balls to Cam Phillips where like they had a drive going and then they're like, it's 3rd and short, 4th and short. Let's chuck it deep to Phillips. It's like, well, that was maybe curious play calling in that decision. But that was definitely one that could have gone the other way. But what's interesting about this rivalry, I mean, this has been such a great rivalry over the years because it used to mean whoever won this was the Coastal champ. Right, like I mean, I know there was the carousel through the ACC where every team had a turn where they won the Coastal Division at a certain point. But for those first, 10 years, in the 8-10 years in the league, it was whoever won Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech was probably going to represent the conference in the championship game. So I feel like this rivalry really developed out of that whole thing, and there were some really good games back in the day. Yeah,
the odd thing really, like, it's hard to imagine a team winning 4 consecutive games in Lane Stadium. But it's happened. And it's happened under 3 different head coaches.
It's even crazier.
For Virginia. Actually, it's 3 different head coaches for Georgia Tech as well. So it's not like, one coaching staff for either side having the number of another coach. It's been a collective group. But, none of those things matter for this game. Certainly there are guys who played in 2022 that are going to be playing in this game, but at the same time, because of the portal, there's been a lot of roster turnover on both teams. and there's nobody left from 2018. So those are neat stats and everything, but also sort of meaningless.
Can you protect the Lane Stadium home field advantage, and can you protect the T on Lane Stadium? If you walk by and you notice where it says Lane Stadium on the outside, the T is like a slightly different color than the other ones. It's because Georgia Tech has this habit of fans stealing like a T from the opposing team's campus somewhere. So look at that when you go by. It's like a slightly different color. Like, I don't know how they can't match the color. Just paint it the same color or whatever it is, but it's slightly off from before. That's because somebody had stolen the T on a previous trip here, to the point where Virginia Tech had like somebody in a security guard in a van sitting out by that all night after the game. I remember coming out of the stadium one time. We walked by and sure enough, there's somebody in a van, watching that thing the whole night.
That is a crazy story right there.
I remember when it used to say home of the Fighting Gobblers. I know you don't. It used to say home of the Fighting Gobblers on the side of Tech's press box. And for a while, they took those off to do the West Side expansion. And obviously they never put them back up, and a lot of old school fans hated that. But for a while, all those letters were, I believe they were actually under where the band sits in the north end zone. It was either that or the numbers from. I think it was that. And I was like, I'm not a thief. But if there was anything that would have been worth stealing, that would have been.
It sounds like something a thief would say. Right. I think you're trying to throw people off the scent with that one.
But how cool would some of those letters be on the podcast?
It would go great with those Virginia Tech branded weights that you probably have in your basement.
I know. Yep.
There you go. If anybody has any of those sitting around, you know where to call.
Justin Fuente had some.
He did, yeah.
Because when he listed his house for sale, you could see him in the pictures of his house.
That's what I love about.
So does that mean that now Brent Pry has some because he lives in that same house? He bought that house.
That's what I love about McComas. They got all the VT weights.
Aiding and abetting.
There we go. Another interesting stat here. Since joining the ACC, the Hokies are 7-2 against Georgia Tech in Atlanta, 4-5 inside Lane Stadium. You were talking about, Chris, things that Hokie fans want changed or wish returned with those letters on the side of the press box. One thing I've been seeing people are calling about on Twitter, again, as much as we love them, Tech fans are never happy. Finally got the new uniforms, right? They're like, well, now you got to update in the north end zone the retired numbers. It's the Justin Fuente jerseys, and they're like, now we need new banners for the retired numbers.
I like how those are like associated with him, like he came up with the design or something.
Right?
He outsourced it to Cornelson, and they came up with this the collarbone stripe design. It's horrible. What are these guys doing? They're too focused on the uniforms. Yeah,
I don't see how people even pay attention to stuff. Like, I would never notice.
I know. Maybe just look at the name and the number. Like, be impressed by that.
Tech's uniforms change on a yearly basis these days anyway.
They should base it on whoever was wearing the uniform at the time.
Right.
Well, it's funny. Idea. It's funny how what you do in the uniform impacts people's opinions on it, right? Like, if Tech was winning games in those uniforms, nobody would hate him nearly as much.
Is Hunter Carpenter's number retired? Is he one? He's not. That's a shame. They should retire it and then use the uniforms that Tech wore back then, which were like black and gray.
Did they have numbers back then, or was that pre-numbers?
I don't know. But their uniforms were like black and gray. It looked like prisoners. Yeah, that would be a good uniform to hang up there.
Well, Georgia Tech last season in 2023, they went 7-6, 5-3 in ACC play. They won their bowl game in the Gasparilla Bowl down in Tampa against UCF. 30-17 was the final score there. Brent Key is now in his second year as the full-time head coach. He was the interim for a second there in 2022 after they fired Jeff Collins pretty early on in the season, and he was part of that crew that beat Tech in Lane in 2022.
That's one of those coaching changes where you can see immediately that how much one head coach can change things. Like, they could barely win a game under Jeff Collins, and they were generally losing their ACC games by an average of 30 points. And Brent Key gets elevated in the middle of the season, and immediately they start playing competent football. And I think they went maybe like 4-4 in his 8 games that year or something like that. And just all of a sudden looked like, they knew what they were doing on the football field, which they never looked like they were doing under Jeff Collins. So I think he's done a very good job there.
Well, they like switched their like special teams, like punt return or punt coverage type thing in the middle of the season. Like, that's how bad it was under the previous staff, and it made a huge difference. And I think the interesting thing under Key at Georgia Tech is they've been extremely competitive against really good teams. Like they're the ones that will go out there and beat like a ranked team, but then lose to Bowling Green or something like that. Like they have these weird splits where they really show up for big games. So it'll be interesting to see this week how they perform here, because come in with a backup quarterback and you go, are they going to be competitive in the game like this? Like sometimes they've shown up for games like this and been pretty feisty on the other side.
Yeah, they're rarely not competitive.
Yeah,
even the games they've lost this year. I mean, I watched their game against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame won. I think it was 31-13, but it was a slow death, so to speak. Like it was a good game at halftime. Like Georgia Tech botched a field goal right before halftime. They would have made it 14-10, and it took a while for Notre Dame to pull away. But they were competitive in that game. Over 4 quarters with Notre Dame, and the Irish are obviously a very good team.
There was some somewhat lofty expectations for the Yellow Jackets heading into this season. I think we all sat here and said that they could be a team that could definitely make some noise in the ACC, and they've kind of done that. They were also coined as having one of the most difficult schedules in the country coming into the year. They're 5-3, 3-2 in ACC play. To Chris's point, coming off the heels of the loss to Notre Dame, they played that one at Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Yeah, they've obviously Florida State is not as good as people thought they were going to be. But regardless of that, Georgia Tech has still played a tough schedule, and it's going to get even tougher. I mean, they're at Virginia Tech, they host Miami, and I think they host NC State, and
Georgia.
Then they're at Georgia to end the season. Like it doesn't really get any easier for those guys. So I always viewed them as a team that whatever record they have at the end of the year, there probably would be 2 games better against an easier schedule. I think they're a well-coached team. Their offense is actually reminds me somewhat of the Virginia Tech offense, with the strengths and weaknesses of the players and
the splits for sure.
Yeah, exactly, and how they're motion dependent and smoke and mirrors dependent and all that. So I've looked forward to this one for a long time. It's interesting. Like before the season, I had Virginia Tech coming into this game with a 6-1 record. And then I had them losing to Georgia Tech at home. That was one of my preseason loss predictions. And then I had them beating Syracuse. And I think I'm kind of flipped on that at this point. But we'll see. But even with a backup quarterback, which we'll talk about later, it's still an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I had them. I picked this as one of my losses, too. I had them same thing, 6-1 coming into this, losing this game. And I actually had them losing to Syracuse, then upsetting Clemson. I don't feel confident about any of those picks now at this point. I've actually, not to spoil it later, but I flipped who I think will win this game for my preseason prediction. But, it's Georgia Tech. They're always, they can rise up and play a tough game. So I don't feel like this one's just like automatic win, even though you look at the line and you would think it that way.
They have wins over Florida State, Georgia State, VMI, Duke, and North Carolina. Their losses at Syracuse, at Louisville, who, again, Louisville's shown that they're a pretty decent team, maybe not as good as we had thought they might be, and then just lost to Notre Dame. Let's talk a little bit about this quarterback situation, Chris, here, because some of the narrative is that, well, they play Miami next week. They get Miami at home. Are they trying to save Haynes King for that? I'm under the belief that, look, you don't do that, especially not in the ACC.
No, it's a game that in front of you that is winnable.
Right.
And you don't hold your. I mean, I think they have some confidence in Zach Pyron because, let's face it, he's won in Lane Stadium before. He's not your typical backup. I think he's actually got a stronger arm than Haynes King. But I think if Haynes King is healthy, he'll be out there. It's just very questionable whether he will be or not.
Yeah, what is it, a shoulder? Is that what he has?
I think so.
Okay.
They don't really talk about that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Gamesmanship there. I know Brent Key was very adamant earlier this week. He's like, we have not ruled him out. Like, whenever a coach comes out and says that, I feel
it's like Grant Wells was week to week for
you're trying a little bit too hard to like make the other team like you have to prepare for him, because we are not ruling him out of this game. I would say based on the line movement from 7.5 to 10.5 where it's gone now, I think Vegas probably knows or is strongly hinting that he's not going to play in this game, which is a bummer for Georgia Tech, because I think Haynes King is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in this league. Just the stats that he put up last year didn't necessarily get the respect coming into this year that I thought he should have. Just a really great dual threat quarterback, hits you both ways. And Pyron played well last time he was in here, and had the game winning run. I think 3.5 minutes left, a 9-yard score that he had there. But I saw how he played last week. Again, that's a pretty good defense he's going up against Notre Dame. It's just not quite the same juice he brings to this offense.
Yeah, to your point, Andy, Notre Dame, a top 10 defense in the country. And looking at Haynes King's stats from last year, led the ACC in touchdown passes, also led the ACC in picks, though. So you have that. He's improved this year, taking care of the ball in the somewhat about a half a season sample size with him not playing last week. The completion percentage is up a little bit this year, and he can really run the ball.
Yeah, he can. He's a very good runner. Like, he doesn't necessarily look like it. Like, when I was watching their Florida State game earlier this year, he'd run to the corner, and it didn't look like he was going to win the race to the corner, and then yet he would win the race to the corner every single time. It's like maybe he's one of those long striders that is faster than he looks, but. He's improved his completion percentage by 10% this year. He's up over 70%. I mean, it's like 71% or something like that this year. And last year, 27 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. And this year, 8 touchdowns, just 1 interception. So he's improved. He's greatly improved as a passer this year, and just as good a runner as he always was. In fact, that UNC game, when he got knocked out of the game halfway through the fourth quarter, I think he had 11 carries for over 100 yards. So this is the type of quarterback who would give Virginia Tech all sorts of trouble. They give a lot of teams all sorts of trouble if he was healthy, but it doesn't sound like he's healthy.
The thing about Pyron is not as strong of a runner as Haynes King.
He's solid. I mean, he had 66 yards against Virginia Tech 2 years ago. I mean, a lot of times it does seem like whatever quarterback is playing, they get higher than their average running the football against Virginia Tech. Castellanos last week, he set his career low in rushing yards 4 straight weeks, and then came into Virginia Tech and rushed for, 50-some yards?
I thought it was 89 yards.
Well, no, that was after sacks.
Okay.
After sacks. The sacks knocked it down to 50-something. Yeah. But, yes, he had a lot of positive gains in that, despite basically not doing that since the first game of the season. So Pyron, I think, is like a career 3.5 yards per carry rusher, but I've seen him run the ball successfully against Virginia Tech. I thought he was pretty good running it against Notre Dame last week, a couple sacks, which, as it turns out, are just 2 of the 3 sacks they've allowed this year. That cut into his running totals a little bit, but Virginia Tech has difficulty stopping the run. This is a team that is still 100th in the country in run defense. They haven't given up as many huge plays as they did last year, but their yards per carry allowed is pretty much exactly the same, and every team has rushed for at least 136 yards on the Hokies. Last year they had 4 games where they got gashed. They also had 4 games where they completely dominated the other team, including like Syracuse, 0 rushing yards. They haven't had any dominant rushing defense performances this year. So I think the key to this one for Georgia Tech, it's the same as Virginia Tech. Establish the running game, which in turn will help your passing game.
Why don't you just go ahead and spoil my lead mailbag question this week? I wrote all about that. And J.C. Price talked a little bit about it last night, the rushing defense. And he's like, they're giving up too many leaky runs where it's like they have a guy and then he gets a couple more yards on top of that. And, I looked up statistically, this is statistically the worst rushing defense that Brent Price had going back to his time at Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of been a calling card of his defenses over the years, is stopping the run. And, this Georgia Tech team is a challenge to stop on the ground. I mean, you look at it's such a clear divide between one and the other. When they win, they're averaging 244 yards on the ground. When they lose, it's 91.3. So, I mean, that's the key to the game right there. Stop the run, you win the game.
To add some context to what the guys are talking about, Virginia Tech's current per game rush defense average is 170.3 yards per game, and that's number 100 in the country out of something like, I think the FBS teams are up to 134 now, so not good.
I think they're 98th now. I think there was some action last night.
That's right, yeah. But at any rate, their yards per carry allowed against Power 5 teams last year was 4.19, and this year it's 4.17. Yeah. So there's very little difference. There's not quite as many long runs, but again, like Andy said, it's more 5 to 10 yard runs this year. They're not quite getting gashed, but at the same time, teams are being more consistent on the ground.
Well, and I think the few times they have been gashed this year, it hasn't been quite that play that lost you the game. Like at Rutgers last year, we pointed to it and said that was the play that lost them the game, right? Like ODU goes for a long one, and you're like, you still won by 3 touchdowns.
Fortunately, it's ODU. Right?
Yeah.
And ODU had a run late. I think Bryce Duke, didn't he have a run late that really racked up the rushing total? So those aren't games where they hurt you, whereas Florida State last year, it's a first quarter 80-yard touchdown run. It's like, okay, that one's going to hurt. That's going to play into the final score here.
Well, even if Haynes King doesn't go, the rushing threats continue because Jamal Haynes can tote the rock out of the backfield. 1,000-yard rusher last year, had 8 total touchdowns. More of a speedy, elusive back type of guy, not going to run through you, but he can get around you.
Yeah, I think he's got very good vision and cutback ability. If you look at his long run against UNC late, which iced the game, he's going right, and he's got his arm on his offensive lineman, and he sees the defense commit to that side, and then he just cuts it right back up the middle in the vacated hole and goes 70-some yards for a touchdown. He's not the biggest back in the world. I swear these teams don't take their rosters seriously anymore. He's listed at 190 on their roster, but 180 on their depth chart. But anyway, he's not 200 pounds. But when you look at him, he looks bigger than 190, and he doesn't quite break as many tackles as a guy like Tootin. It's not part of his game. He's very much about vision, and he's got good acceleration and things like that. But 1,000-yard rusher last year, pretty good out of the backfield too. Can catch the ball. Very capable back. And again, I think their running scheme is very, very good.
Couple of good receivers for them as well. Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton. They'll get involved in the run game, but both of them listed under 6 feet tall. There could be a little bit of size mismatch there, maybe that plays in favor of the Hokies.
Yeah, they'll use those guys in the run game a little bit too. I think they've combined for 16 or 18 carries this year. So it's not quite the Paul Johnson triple option offense, but there's, like Virginia Tech, there's triple option elements to it. And they do use those guys on a little bit of a, they're not A-backs like in the old Paul Johnson offense, but they'll use them in a similar way sometimes. Singleton, I think, is a little bit more dangerous, but you're splitting hairs. But they don't have like a big, tall, productive outside receiver like maybe the Hokies have in Daquan Felton.
One thing is this offensive line is impressive. They've allowed just 3 sacks this season. Now, I think part of that is when you're a run-first team and there's not as many opportunities at sacks.
Haynes King has thrown 14 more passes than Kyron Drones in the same amount of games. They're very good at protecting the quarterback.
Yeah.
They're also very good at scheming to give King quick throws and easy throws. I mean, Virginia Tech hasn't allowed as many sacks the last 2 weeks. Why? Because they're getting the ball out a lot faster. A lot of those one-read plays.
Yeah.
I mean, they were doing things earlier this season they shouldn't be doing, like 5-step drops and having him hang around the pocket for 4 seconds and go through reads and things like that. And I don't think that's what this offense is built for. So I think Tech's game planning has been smart. Virginia Tech's game planning has been smarter the last couple of weeks, and we've seen fewer sacks as a result. But that's the type of thing Georgia Tech has been doing all year. It's a good line. It's an experienced line. I said last week that BC probably had the most experienced line Tech would face this year, and a week later I'm saying the same thing about Georgia Tech. It's even more experienced than the BC line. They've been outmanned a time or two. That's what you have to do. You have to outman them, out-physical them, out-talent them, because all these guys are basically homegrown at Georgia Tech, and they've played combined probably 7,000 or 8,000 snaps together. They know what they're doing. They're very, very cohesive. You have to go out there and physically whip them because their scheme's very good and they play very well together.
Well, I think that's obvious from who their head coach is. I mean, he was the former offensive line coach before he was promoted, that he played offensive line in college. That's his background everywhere. So you would expect that group to be sort of his baby. And
Yep.
like they're pretty good there. And you mentioned the 3 sacks that they've allowed all year. I asked the coaches about this last night. And they're like, they just stay in good situations. They're on schedule. They're the type of team that goes for it a lot on 4th down. So if it's 3rd and 4 or something like that, where you're like, all right, here's where you really get after the quarterback, and where Tech's done a lot of damage. Virginia Tech has done a lot of damage with the pass rush. Georgia Tech might run it on 3rd and 4. That might be a good spot for them to run it, knowing that they're going to go for it on 4th down too. So they sort of stay out of those 3rd and long situations where that's when you can really crank up your pass rush and get after somebody.
Exactly. So 2 of the 3 sacks they allowed were against Notre Dame last week, and one of them was like a 3rd and 8 when they were down by 14. So you're
Obvious
passing situation, and the other one was later in the game as well, when they were down by double digits, and you pretty much know they're going to throw. If it's a 1-score game, and especially if it's not late, again, like Andy said, they stay out of those situations, and they understand who they are, and they try to game plan to that.
One of my favorite Pete Thamel quotes is, you cannot microwave an offensive line. It's one of those that takes years and the cohesion, everything to gel and mesh together. Anything else offensively before we get into a little stat time with Will?
No, I think that's all I got.
Sweet. As always.
Wait, sorry. Chris Winkie, former Florida State quarterback who beat Virginia Tech in the national title game. He's actually their assistant head coach, co-offensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach.
Okay.
He's done a nice job down there.
How old do you think Chris Winkie is now?
Oh, my God. Well, he was 26 in that game, right? I'm trying to do math in my head.
Dude's pushing 50 years old.
Got to be, yeah.
Wow.
He is 52 years old.
Wow.
Pride of St. Paul, Minnesota. Went to the same high school as Joe Mauer.
Wow.
Cretin-Derham Hall.
Okay.
Interesting.
And Chris Winkie was a baseball player himself, which
Yeah.
is why he was a 26-year-old
I think
college
Paul
quarterback.
Molitor went there too. They have a
Paul
pretty good background at that school. I can't remember that. I'm pretty sure he went there.
Okay. Sorry, Gio.
No, you're good. You're good. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, including free checking. Visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Let's send it over to the fourth chair. We got 4 of them. With Will, Stat Time with Scott Glesner.
So before we get into Stat Time with Scott Glesner, I was listening to you guys rightly praising Brent Key. I think he's an excellent coach. He's also a very large individual. He walked past me at the ACC kickoff, and wow, he's a big man. While you guys were talking about him, I looked up there. They're also doing a good job recruiting. Virginia Tech, of course, hosts Georgia Tech this year, and then they play them again in Atlanta next year, and then they host them again in Blacksburg in 2026 before they take a couple-year break and then play in 2029. So I got to looking at Georgia Tech's recruiting rankings, and if you look at the 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings, Georgia Tech currently has the number 2 ranked recruiting class in the ACC. In terms of average player rating, they're number 4 in the ACC. And remember, this is out of 17 teams now.
They're normally mid-pack in that.
Yeah. And they currently have 22 commitments, and 7 of them are 4 stars. So they're doing a good job recruiting under Key. So you got that to look forward to, for the next few years when they're playing Virginia Tech.
Let me add something to that. They hired one of Alabama's top fundraisers as the head of their Hokie club or whatever, the Yellow Jacket club, we'll call it. And they are setting fundraising records down there.
Yep.
I mean, big time stuff. Like they're going to renovate their stadium and things like that. I imagine some of those fundraising efforts are also going towards NIL, and their collectives are very healthy. So, again, I'll make my pitch that Virginia Tech needs its own dedicated head of the Hokie club, but I don't want to go down that road again.
Yeah, I don't know much about Georgia Tech's NIL, but you got to assume if the donors are stepping up for the athletic department like that, they're stepping up for NIL. Plus, they're in an area in Atlanta where there's just a lot of easy to find NIL opportunities with a lot of corporations around, very large car dealerships, that sort of thing.
Yep.
The varsity, it's right there.
It is.
What do you have?
Which I've still never eaten there.
Oh, you've
Never eaten
there?
I ate
Come
there
on.
freshman year for that game.
That's where I learned to love mustard on chili dogs because they put it on there. I'm like, they're onto something here. Let's do this at home. I like this.
All right, so let's move on to Stat Time with Scott Glesner, something that I put on Twitter yesterday. I'm kind of fascinated by this. So to open this season, 7 games in, Virginia Tech has scored 23 or more points in all 7 games to start the season. That's what we're talking about. The only other time Virginia Tech started a season with 7 straight games of 23-plus points was 1999. And then in Game 8 against West Virginia, of course, they only scored 22, so that broke the streak. So if the Hokies scored 23 or more points on Saturday, that will be the first time they have done that to open 8 games in a season. Now, Damian Salas chimed in on that tweet, and he said if you're just talking about streaks in general, the streak that Virginia Tech has of scoring 23 or more points in a game is currently at 11 straight, and the VT record is 14. So what I find interesting about that is, remember back in 2022, Brent Pry's first year, Tech didn't score over 30 points in a single game. That was the first time that had happened since the 1970s, I think 1977. I think they averaged, Chris, 17 or 18 points a game in 2022.
Something like that.
Yeah, this was a team that could not score.
It was actually shocking that the scoring streak didn't end that year. If it was ever going to end, you would have thought it would be that year.
They hung on to it. So I thought that was a very interesting stat. And continuing in the vein of how many points you score, the Hokies have scored 20 or more points in the first half in the last 4 games against Georgia Tech. 20 plus in the last 4 games in the first half against Georgia Tech. The first 15 times they met Georgia Tech, they only did that twice. Virginia Tech's highest rushing output versus Georgia Tech was 267 yards in 2011. Remember that game, Chris? That would be I think that was in Atlanta. Let me look at
That game was better known for Logan Thomas. I think he accounted for like 5 touchdowns in that game. He had that one pass right before halftime where he really zipped it across the middle, like through like coverage, and Danny Cole like went up high to catch it, and I think it went for like a 60-yard touchdown or something like that. But that was like one of those games. It's like, okay, there's the. When Logan Thomas, everybody's like, he's going to be a top 5 pick in the draft and stuff like that. You go back to that game and you look at that and you go, man, I could see it with that. It never materialized, but man, he really played well in that game. He had another one in that game where I think he carried it and like it was a quarterback sneak or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And then the piles kept moving and kept moving and kept moving.
Tech kept running the quarterback sneak over and over. Like they were running it on first down late in that game.
His yards per carry on quarterback sneaks had to be like 7 or 8 or something like that year. He was just really good at them.
That was also the game where I think it was a linebacker for Georgia Tech, Atauchu, does that name sound right?
He hauled off and punched him at the end of the play. He got so frustrated they couldn't take him to the ground that after the play was whistled, he like threw a punch at him, and it's like, okay, well, thanks for the first down.
Why would you punch somebody who's wearing a hard football helmet?
He was just mad. They just couldn't stop him.
Yeah. And I think the next year at the ACC kickoff, Adoachu, or however you say his name, I think he was there with Logan, and they're like, no, we're cool. That was just a one-time thing that happened there, but.
And I also remember that being a vintage David Wilson rushing game where he was just hard to bring down. Just that dude had incredible balance, and I remember him actually running backwards on one play at some point or something ridiculous.
Was that the game
like
where Bud Foster lined up Fuller as like a linebacker and just attacked that gap, or was that 2013?
I think that was a future year.
2013. It would have been
because they really like shut him down one year where Fuller was just
I think that was
all over the field. I think that was the one where they wore the Hokie Stone helmets in that one.
Yeah. That was Kyle Fuller, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, he just a phenomenal whip linebacker, just made for the position. That is, I did get the position right?
Well, that's where they lined him up at that game.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not what he normally played.
So one more. 2019 is the only shutout in the series, 45-0 by Virginia Tech. Jeff Collins' magic going there. That was his first year.
That was an absolute butt kicking.
Oh, it was horrible.
I mean, that was like third quarter, and Tech took all of its starters out. It's like they don't need to play anybody.
Do you remember that interception they threw to Caleb Farley, where there was like nobody around?
Well, you ran back and forth across the field. I mean, that team was just defeated that year.
Let's see. Virginia Tech also has the 44-point win back in 2005 when ESPN Game Day came, right?
Mm-hmm. They came to that game because there was a hurricane at the LSU game. So that week, so Game Day couldn't go to LSU. So they're like, screw it, let's just go to Blacksburg instead. And it was a blowout.
And it was hosted on the mall where. Was Torkelson Hall built by that time? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was built. Yeah, it was built when I was in school. So that was a really nice spot for Game Day. I thought it was a good setting.
That's where they've done it the most. That's where they did it for Clemson.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the game where I made the mistake of handing over my God as a Hokie T-shirt so Lee Corso could hold it up on air and never got it back.
Yep.
So as I like to complain about. No other Virginia Tech Georgia Tech games have been decided by more than 24 points. 8 of the last 10 have been decided by 10 or fewer points. So,
well, we know how we do in one-score games. So hopefully that does not transpire. Well, we have a little bit of breaking news here, fellas.
Do we?
This is from a Georgia Tech beat writer. Shout out to Nick, who just sent this my way. Okay, David sent it to Nick, so kudos to David. You have to take everything with a grain of salt, but Georgia Tech coach Brent says today that if the game was to be played today, quarterback Haynes King would be a no when it comes to being available, but said that King will officially remain day-to-day ahead of Saturday's game at Virginia Tech. I think that's something we already kind of knew, but...
I think if you got an injury and it's 2 days before the game and you're not healthy enough to play...
It's typically not a good sign.
It's not a good sign. Even if you do play, you're not going to be 100% unless they just like give him a pain shot, like Varsity Blues or something. You know?
Bud Kilmer out there. Giving...
There we go.
Hey, let's not bury the lead there. It's Thursday, and Brent Key is still talking to the press.
How about that?
On Thursday. Interesting.
I wonder if it was like coach's show or something, but it just says he said to the media. So
Well, maybe it's more smokescreen. Maybe he's like, nah, he's not going to play, and then they'll just roll him out there and he'll play.
there we go.
Maybe I'm just overthinking it.
Let's talk about this Georgia Tech defense a little bit here. Taking a look at some of the defensive numbers, Chris, to your point, you had wrote that they're not particularly impressive at anything. 40th rush defense in the country, yards per carry 55th, passing defense 90th, yards per attempt 84th. I mean, you just kind of go down the list, middle of the pack in the country.
112th in sacks, so it's not like they're in the backfield a whole bunch. You know, on paper, it looks like their rush defense is good, being 40th, and this is against FBS teams only. I don't count the games against FCS.
Right.
Some teams play FCS opponents, some don't.
Right.
And it inflates the stats. So I think they're 26th if you include routing Georgia State or whatever.
Gotcha.
But they're 40th against FBS teams. But it's even worse than that. Their yards per carry is like allowed is 4.16, which is basically Virginia Tech level. And Virginia Tech's run defense is not good. So they just haven't been effective across the board defensively. They also lead the ACC in missed tackles with 85.
Crazy.
The next closest is 77. And in case you didn't realize it, Virginia Tech has a running back that is quite good at forcing missed tackles. So that does not seem like a good matchup from Georgia Tech's standpoint.
You have to remember where this team was coming from last year, though.
Yes.
They ranked 131st nationally last year in rushing defense, 221.3 yards per game. Only Louisiana Tech and North Texas were worse, 5.38 yards per carry. So they're almost a yard per carry lower. So I think when you look at it in that context, you see the direction of where this defense is going. That's such a vast improvement that you go, okay, that does open your eyes a little bit on the direction of this defense.
They hired Mike Elko's defensive coordinator. Mike Elko clearly knows what he's doing on that side.
He's a pretty good coach. Yeah. Everything he touches seems to turn into gold there. Like, you had a little bit of questions about Texas A&M early, but now it's like, okay, they're rolling again. They're doing pretty well. And obviously everything it did at Duke, like, good idea to hire that man, Texas A&M.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think they got the right guy. Something that's interesting about Georgia Tech, in each of their last 3 losses, they've allowed exactly 31 points.
Yeah, I know. So, and two of y'all didn't read my game preview. Clearly,
I picked 31.
Did you pick 31?
So I said,
well, not to give it away, but 2 other people on the set also picked Georgia Tech to allow 31 points to Virginia Tech.
picked 31 and
Did you?
What are the chances of them allowing 31 points in all 4 of their losses this year?
I don't know, but maybe probably not great.
Sounds pretty good. And they've done it 3 times already. Do it again.
Well, the funny thing is I did read your preview, but not until after. And earlier in the week, someone had texted me. They were doing something at work, and it was like, I need to tell them the score of the game. Like, what do you think? And I was like, 31-13, because they're going to be without their quarterback. And I was like, when I came to the set today, I was like, I have to stick to what I said on Monday.
That was their
right?
exact score against Notre Dame.
That's true. It was.
Last week.
That's true.
How many times do you have the exact same score 2 weeks in a row?
Probably not often, but let's
Y'all
hope it
gotta think this
happens
stuff
tomorrow.
through,
All
man.
right, ladies.
All right. How about personnel-wise for this Georgia Tech defense? Couple of solid corners that stand out. Burrell and Harvey.
Burrell is a good player in coverage. Very good player in coverage. Awful in run defense. Can't tackle. I like Zeke Biggers at nose tackle. He's 6'6", 320 pounds. Senior, very experienced player. There's a lot of mass there. I saw him split a double team against Notre Dame last week and make a really nice play in the backfield. So he has an opportunity to give the Hokies trouble, although they handled the defensive tackle for Boston College really well. Worley, is that his name? Cam Worley, I think is his name. He's a very good player. I think he's actually might be better than Biggers. And
It's a great name for if you're 6'6".
He's not bigger than Biggers.
If you're 6'6", 320, that's a great name. It's
It is.
How big,
Oh,
he's
it
pretty
absolutely
big.
is.
No, he's bigger than
Biggers.
that. He's Zeke Biggers.
They also have a player named Romello Height. He's only 6'3", but if he was like 6'6" or something, that would be a very good name for him. But I don't think defensively Georgia Tech is equipped to stop Virginia Tech.
Sure. And fun worth noting as well, Tootin is 129 yards away from the 1,000-yard mark. So keep an eye out on that.
That should have been a buy or sell question for this week. Does Tootin go over 1,000 yards?
I would have bought it.
I would have too.
I would have bought it. So
How could you not buy it the week after it goes for 266? Like
fair, especially if they lead the ACC in missed tackles, and Teuton's very good at forcing those. Special teams wise, anything stand out?
Yeah, they're a disaster. they're 124th in F+ special teams efficiency. They're 6 of 11 field goals this year. They're only like 1 of 7 from beyond 30 yards.
6 of 12, even worse.
6 of 12.
Yeah.
Right. So and I think 1 of 7 beyond 30 yards.
Yep,
something
that's
like
right.
that. They've allowed a punt return for a touchdown. I've got the stat.
Yeah, you got it all. You want me to read the little paragraph here?
Go ahead.
All right. Place kicker Aiden Burr, very similar to Aaron Burr, who was nearly president back in the day.
That was my favorite Got Milk commercial back in the day.
when he's
Do you remember
eating
that one?
the what's it, like a peanut butter sandwich?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, boo.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah. You have no idea.
It was
what
like
we're
a
talking
call.
about.
No idea.
It was like one of those radio call-in shows,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Our trivia question is: this guy shot Alexander Hamilton or whatever." That is like a historian at the Aaron Burr Museum or something like that. But he's eating a peanut butter sandwich, and he tries to call in, and he's like, "It's Burr," and they can't understand what he's trying to say.
And he's like, "Oh, let me get some milk."
This was
And
his
he
moment.
runs out of
That's
milk.
what it was, a milk
milk.
commercial.
Yeah.
So
I'll show it to you when we get done, Will.
All right, Nick, you have to find that
It's
commercial.
a pretty classic commercial
It really
from back
is.
in the day, back before Hamilton was hot. You know, this is when it was Burr's
I was gonna
day.
say that's where I know
This
Aaron
is
Burr.
like
I loved
mid
Hamilton.
'90s commercial.
Yeah.
Now, Nick, to be clear, do not embed that commercial in the middle of our podcast, because then we won't be able to make any ad revenue.
Link it in the description.
But find it and link it in the description.
There we go. So Aiden Burr is just 6 of 12, and he's 1 of 7 from beyond 30 yards. If Georgia Tech has the ball in a manageable situation on Virginia Tech's side of the field, it's a strong bet that they'll go for it on 4th down. It's 13 of 18 on 4th down conversions so far in 2024, the 18th best mark in FBS. And then you were asking Chris about something else there.
Well, didn't I put some stats in there about kickoff return, punt return?
Yeah. 69th in the country in kickoff return, 68th in punt return, kickoff return defense 121, punt return defense 104.
Yeah, right. And let's see, they bungled a snap on a field goal attempt against Notre Dame. They also had a field goal blocked by Notre Dame. They're a mess on special teams. This should be a major advantage for Virginia Tech. And I know Virginia Tech has had a few screw ups on special teams this year, but from an efficiency standpoint, Tech is 19th in the country, and they haven't had any.
Virginia Tech
is.
Did they have anything bad against BC? It seems like there's been one per week, and I'm trying to think. I don't remember
think they
one
did
against BC.
No.
Well, a spoiler for next week. I don't know if anybody is as bad as Syracuse in special teams.
I took note of that when I was looking at the numbers this week.
I mean, they gifted UNLV. At least they won the game. But they had a blocked punt for a touchdown. Then they had a punt where the guy came untouched, same guy, untouched, who leads the nation in blocked punts, by the way. Untouched, he comes through, and the punter said, "Oh, this is going to get blocked again," and started running sideways, and then got tackled at his own 10, gifted another touchdown there. They've missed like half of their field goals. It's rough.
So let's take the opportunity to jump in here and say, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it on Thursday, Pittsburgh and Syracuse play tonight, right?
Tonight.
So where is that game?
At Pitt.
At Pitt. So, Syracuse is up next, so tune in and watch them. I've seen them play a couple times this year, and so if you're a Hokie fan, check them out tonight and see what's up next week.
I will be locked in. And that kind of leads us into this fun, a little bit analytical discussion here. We were talking about the landscape of the ACC earlier. I saw this tweet, and I wanted to bring it up to you guys. Technically, we could have a 7-way tie for first place in the ACC with 7 teams having a 6-2 mark in conference play. Now, some things have to happen across the board. The odds of it are like, a trillion. But like where we currently sit, I mean, every game is just so important, especially with the divisions. And the teams that are in contention, so to speak, would be Syracuse, Miami, Pitt, Duke, SMU, Virginia Tech, and Clemson.
I hope they do.
It would be awesome.
I hope a bunch of conferences have awful tiebreakers this year, and that leads everybody to the obvious conclusion that having huge conferences in football where you can't have balanced scheduling is a dumb idea.
It's never going to happen.
It's never gonna
when
happen.
we get to this point in the midway of the season, it's like it could be a 7-way tie, and it never plays out. It's just like the people are like, what if these three teams are undefeated? Somebody always slips up along the way. My only hope was that if there's a bunch of teams tied at the top, that they could go to a semifinals, finals matchup in conference championship, which I've been advocating for since they screwed up the previous model and they made up these huge conferences. I feel like that's the way they have to go. When you have a 17-team conference, like it's just hard to pick two teams to play for the title.
For whatever it's worth, for this scenario to happen, Virginia Tech's losses would have to be Miami, obviously that already happened, and then their other loss would have to be Duke, because that would allow Duke to be in this 7-team landscape. So that says that they beat Syracuse, Clemson, and then they lose to Duke. I don't know, but Duke is 6-1 for what
Their
it's worth.
offense is horrible.
They're not great.
They
They're not
had
great,
like
but they're winning
160
games.
yards and beat Florida State. They are resilient.
Somehow they came back. They were down to Carolina by like 3 touchdowns or something.
Came back, but
back.
you know,
Well, that's
Carolina.
that was one of the questions in my mailbag they'll be posting today. Is like, you know, what are the the question was, what are the mathematical, like, what are the probabilities of the SEC or ACC title games? And I'm like, well, that's no fun. Just go look at a calculator for that. But I'll give you the juice matchups for the top ones. So I gave a top 5 with that. And spoiler alert, I couldn't find any juicy matchups involving Duke, Syracuse, and Pittsburgh. So had to leave them out of the juice rankings in the top 5. Sorry about that, Gio, but
okay.
Maybe they can go back, add some juice to their resume, and maybe I'll think about it in the future. But I just couldn't get excited about matchups involving any of those teams.
That saddens me. It really does.
Well, you've got one game tonight.
We got a big one tonight, a huge one.
If you go out there and smash Pitt by 40, then
maybe that adds some juice. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm just trying to win the game. I don't know about smashing anybody by 40. So how big is this game for Virginia Tech? I think we've talked about it. This is must win.
well, yeah. I mean, if you want to accomplish your goal of playing for an ACC title, which Brent probably established as their goal in the preseason in Charlotte, then you pretty much have to win this game. You pretty much have to win the rest of your games. That's just the way it is these days in a 17-team league, and only two teams go to the playoffs from the league. If they're not going to do, semifinals like Andy suggested, you've got to win almost all your games, or maybe drop just one. It's difficult because also if you lose it, you look at it from an overall bowl perspective. You drop to 4-4.
4 losses going on the road to Syracuse, Clemson after that.
Then
that's a tough road. You don't want to go into that back-to-back with 4 losses.
Exactly. You don't want to have to. You don't want to go back to, like, remember every year back in the day, like towards the end of Beamer's tenure, where it was like, well, you're 4-6 and you got to beat Boston College and UVA to end the season and get a bowl game, and then you squeak those games out. And
that happened like 5 years.
Oh yeah, it was incredible.
And it was always like, you're probably going to beat UVA because you always do, but it was never like a blowout. It felt like in those games they'd always
could have
squeak
gone
them
either
out.
way.
Yeah,
exactly. So you don't. UVA's more competent now than they were then. I still don't think they're very good, but they're more competent than they were. And Duke doesn't have much of an offense, but they win games. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. So from a lot of standpoints, this is a quote unquote must win game. I know you get to the second half of the season, and if you're competing for any sort of a title, it's the same for everybody.
We'll check in with Will one more time before we predict this thing.
I agree with you guys. There's just I always simplify it down to there's just a big difference between 5-3 and 4-4. If you're 5-3 and you go and you finally win a game in the Dome, you're 6-3, and that's pretty good. And I was having the thought as you guys were talking, every game Virginia Tech wins in the ACC, that decision at the end of the Miami game by the officials just becomes more and more torturous.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, what you got, Chris? Who's winning this thing, and what's the score?
I've got it 37-24 Virginia Tech. I've got them covering. I've got them winning by double digits. I think Georgia Tech will move the football and score. I think if Haynes King plays and he's healthy, it's going to be closer than that. And in fact, I think it's a kind of a toss-up game if he plays. I don't think he's going to play. I think Pyron is better than, like, miles ahead of, like, the Stanford quarterback that Virginia Tech faced.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's miles ahead of the ODU quarterbacks. He's miles ahead of that Marshall quarterback who has since been benched and is now a backup. Like, this guy could be starting in a lot of schools, but they still lack a little bit of punch, I think. Now, granted, the one-game example against Notre Dame, that's against a better defense in Virginia Tech fields. But I still feel like Georgia Tech, their defense isn't very good. Virginia Tech's offense is really hitting its stride. Kyron Drones has had back-to-back weeks over 70% completion percentage. His highest 2 completion percentages of his career have come in back-to-back weeks. Previously, he'd only gone over 70% in one game his entire career. So I just really like the way the Hokies are trending offensively, and I think the Georgia Tech defense is a good matchup for him. The thing I'm hesitant, like, Brent Pry wins all his games by double digits, and it's like the closest one has been 17 points. I feel like I'm only picking them to win by 13.
Tight game.
I know. So, like, they're either going to win by 17 or they're going to lose. So I probably should have picked it like 37-20 or 41-24 or something like that.
Or 31-13.
Right. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, I'll just go 37-24.
What you got, Andy?
Yeah, I'm on that same margin. I flipped it for my preseason pick, and I think if Haynes King was playing, I'd feel more confident about Georgia Tech coming in here and springing the upset. Without him, not as much firepower in that offense. I got the Hokies 33-20. It's the blowout Brent. I mean, that's the way he wins. He wins games by double digits when he wins them in the ACC. So I think that's going to happen on Saturday.
How about you, Will?
Here's the thing to watch this weekend. Virginia Tech has never won 3 games in a row under Brent Pry.
Very true.
And this is an opportunity to do that.
They've had 6 opportunities.
5. This is the 6th opportunity to do it. So
if it weren't for the cheating refs,
I'm just saying, on a streak right now. I'm picking the Hokies to win a 1-score game, 31-24.
Oh, picking a 1-score game.
2 things that haven't happened before, right?
There we go. Yeah, true. Nick's got it. Virginia Tech 31, Georgia Tech 20. David has it. Virginia Tech 35, Georgia Tech 26. So,
interesting. How'd he land on 26?
I know.
I'd like to come in here and do that math.
That is interesting. And a 9-point game, too. Yeah. So under 10, but still not a one possession
Maybe
game.
He's trusting their field goal team to be that bad on extra
Probably
points.
will miss an extra point or something. Yeah.
We'll go for 2. Have to go for 2 in situations.
Yeah.
So, Gio, let's do the fan vote. So far, we've got 507 votes in the game preview. 50% say the Hokies win by 1-10. Another 32% say the Hokies win by 11 plus. So that's 82% picking the Hokies to win. People are feeling pretty saucy after the last couple of weeks.
And you can see why. They've been playing good football. And again,
Totally
I got
understandable.
31-13. So I guess I'm not as high on Georgia Tech with a backup quarterback. Chris had me so convinced that the Hokies just get after backup quarterbacks.
Well, you better hope. I mean, Virginia Tech's getting fortunate dating back to last year. They're getting to face a lot of backup quarterbacks. You better wrap Kyle McCord in bubble wrap.
In bubble wrap.
Virginia Tech curse might strike you. Your boy there.
That swept across my mind. Trust me, it has, no doubt about it. All right, well, get there. Noon kick on Saturday. That means you can have the entire evening ahead of you to watch more college football or do whatever. Get to Lane. It's a maroon out homecoming. It's going to be fun. Gentlemen, enjoy the game. For Nick Brown, for Will Stewart, for Andy Bitter, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long. Thanks to First Bank and Trust Company as always. And we'll talk to you after the game on Monday.